I'll mute myself.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We will begin in just a few moments. Please stand by.
Can folks hear me? Carrie, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So we'll start. Thank you, everyone who is on the webinar today. I'm Jessica Love, Executive Director for Prosperity Indiana, and we're pleased to provide the next edition of our virtual COVID-19 response events. I hope you can tell that we're trying to get as much information as possible out as quickly as possible. And because of that, we may find that there are outstanding questions that we'll need to answer as a follow-up to this webinar as well. We'll do our very best to answer as many of them during our time today. And at a time like this, I've become even more impressed by our team and our partners who continue to step up. I'm thankful for our team members and for the Small Business Administration for providing content today, diving into the new legislation and sharing what we know. And thank you also to Fifth Third Bank for support of our work through a $100,000 Strengthening Our Communities grant. Nearly half of those funds went to support capacity building efforts through a partnership with IHCDA and their Moving Forward program. The remainder was awarded to Prosperity to provide training and technical assistance to nonprofits working in affordable housing, especially community development corporations, many of which are participating today. So we are especially grateful for Fifth Third's willingness to pivot their support to our COVID-19 response efforts and for their participation in the event today. I would now like to introduce Kevin Hipskin. Kevin is the Regional President for the Greater Indiana Gateway for Fifth Third Bank, and his continued availability to participate in events important to the bank's partners and the community is extremely commendable. Kevin, thank you for joining us today, and I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you, and my remarks will be very brief. I just want to echo the appreciation of everyone joining this call today. We're in very unprecedented times, and I know everyone has personal needs that have changed quite a bit over the last 3 weeks, and so the fact that you're here today trying to help out others is just a testament to the strength of your character and your organizations. On behalf of Fifth Third Bank and the Foundation, we're also very grateful to Prosperity Indiana. Jessica, thank you. And for everyone gathering here today. Really now more than ever, we must all unite forces to address the financial and human needs of our community while we continue to take the personal responsibility needed to mitigate and curtail the potential impact of COVID-19 virus. I looked at the agenda today, and I think we're covering some great topics today. The SBA is doing amazing work to very quickly marshal all their resources to deploy nearly $350 billion in assistance to small businesses. As you'll probably hear, this has been a crazy week for everyone to try to gear up for this. Many of the banks went live today with their programs, and the amount of applications and processing that has to be done over the next 90 days is just extraordinary. And so I want to thank the SBA representatives for being on this call to give people information, real-time information on how small businesses and non-for-profits access these dollars. The other side of the program that I also saw is this is partially about financial needs, and certainly Fifth Third Bank has been there with programs that address the financial needs of both their businesses and consumers. But beyond this, there is going to be a lot of human needs that have to be addressed far past any impact of the virus itself, because many of the people are going to be unemployed at record levels. And obviously that creates other human needs like housing, hunger, and other things that the community must address. So I really do commend Prosperity Indiana. At Fifth Third Bank, we're proud to be right alongside providing our resources as well as our dollars to help meet these both human needs and financial needs for individuals and businesses in our communities. So with that being said, I just want to thank everyone and hope you enjoy the program today.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you to everyone, as Jessica mentioned, who are participating in today's webinar. Just a few housekeeping items that I'd like to go through. If you're not muted, please do so by pressing *6 on your telephone or by muting yourself on your computer. For questions, there are two options to ask questions of our panelists today. The first is you can use the little raised hand option. That will alert myself that you have a question, and I will open up your mic so that you can ask that question. Or you can type in your question in the question box, and I will make sure that it gets the question is given to one of the panelists, and that we provide you with an online answer. So without further ado, I just want to share a little bit of information about Prosperity Indiana with each of you. Many of you may be members of Prosperity Indiana, and we appreciate that. But others of you, this may be your first time interacting with us. And so just a little bit about us. We were founded in 1986 as the Indiana Association for Community and Economic Development. We are a statewide intermediary organization with a local focus. Our member organizations strengthen communities and improve lives in rural, suburban, and urban areas in all of Indiana's 92 counties. Members provide housing opportunity, they meet basic needs, they connect Hoosiers to jobs, they create vital places, and they do all of this and more. Our mission is to build a better future for Indiana's communities by providing advocacy, leveraging resources, and engaging in an empowered network to create inclusive opportunities that improve assets and lives. We do this in 4 ways. We do this through resources, and just to mention, one of the resources we're providing at the moment is our COVID-19 hub, which is available on our website. So if you're a member, you can access those resources in that hub. We do engagement, so we are engaging individuals through one of our Facebook groups that's dedicated to COVID-19. We are advocates. We advocate at both the state and federal levels. And we also have signature programs that we provide to our members. So today's objectives are to disseminate information about the phases of congressional action to date to alleviate the impact of COVID-19 on our nonprofit organizations, primarily. We want to help educate all of you, particularly those of you in the community development realm, on the effects of federal legislation on affordable housing and other programs. And we want to connect communities, organizations, and individuals to appropriate resources. A few disclaimers. We definitely want to thank the National Council of Nonprofits, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, for which some of the information you're going to see and hear today is from their analysis, which is based on their best understanding. Just so many of you know, this legislation, the CARES Act in particular, was just passed and signed into law last Friday. So there's a lot of understanding that's still taking place. Just know that the federal government and federal agencies are just now starting to issue regulations and guidelines around these new acts. And state governments have most likely not released any rules or regulations or guidelines up to this point. And finally, please do not construe this webinar as legal or financial advice. Please consult proper counsel or accountants or human resource specialists if you need in-depth information. So there have been 3 phases so far to the COVID response. The first phase was passed on March the 6th and signed into law on March the 9th with the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act. That provided supplemental appropriations to federal agencies such as the CDC, the SBA, the FDA, and others. But it did not at that time put near as enough amount of money into the budget as it would here later. Phase 2 was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. This is where the Family and Medical Leave Acts come into play. Phase 3, which I mentioned was passed last week, is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. We'll talk about that, of course. There is a phase 4, if you've been reading in the newspapers. It's to be determined, but once Congress comes back on April the 20th, Speaker Pelosi has mentioned in the press that there's probably going to be another stimulus relief package, and that's going to include perhaps infrastructure and other spending items. And then there's even talk of a phase 5 in terms of recovery. And so stay tuned for both of those, for information on both of those. So now to the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES. It's Public Law 116-136 for those who might want to go and actually read the text of the legislation. So $2 trillion in appropriations were appropriated under the Act, and it provides significant relief for nonprofits, including faith-based and religious organizations. This is something that did not occur in 2008, and so thanks to organizations like the National Council of Nonprofits, groups that represent associations and philanthropy groups, they did an extraordinary job in getting relief for nonprofits through the CARES Act. So I'm going to turn it over now to Rhonda Crouch. She's the Economic Development Specialist with the USBA Small Business Administration, and she is going to discuss with us the relief package. Rhonda?
Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, as you know, this is a very different times. This is not normal circumstances. Under normal circumstances, I would have a lot more information on my slides, but even if I had made slides probably at 8 o'clock this morning, they may not be the same today. So I'm going to give you, the basics information, and we'll leave plenty of time for questions. You go to the next slide, please. For the latest information, please go to our website at sba.gov/coronavirus. That will give you links to everything that we have available as far as resources, not only for our small businesses, but also for the nonprofit organizations. That's the best place to go for information. I know, like yesterday, Treasury released some information on the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP. They were a little early in releasing some of that because not all of it was completely accurate. So always please go to our website at sba.gov/coronavirus for the most up-to-date information. And then if you want to receive our newsletter to stay up to date with what's going on, I promise we won't be bombarding you with hundreds of emails. I don't think we have time to do that right now, to tell you the truth. But if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, and when this is all over and we're back to normal again, you're welcome to get back into the web page and tell us no, you're done receiving our newsletter. If you go to sba.gov/updates, you can sign up for the newsletter right there. All it requires is like your area, or not your area code, your zip code and your email address. So next page, please. Again, don't forget to go to the coronavirus webpage for information. Now I'm going to give you a brief overview of basically the two programs that we have available to get money into your hands. The first one is our Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or EIDL loan for short. This is a disaster loan program. We have our disaster program that's available for when there are natural disasters across the U.S. This, of course, is the first time in our history that it's ever been a disaster that covers the entire United States and all U.S. territories. Also, the first time it's ever been for a virus. Normally in Indiana, it's things like tornado, flood, drought. So you can imagine the volume has been huge. But this program is for up to $2 million, up to 30 years, and for nonprofits, it's a fixed interest rate at 2.75%. The money for the EIDL loan is for the things that you need to keep the business or the nonprofit, if you want to look at it that way, in business. So that's your working capital needs, whatever that might be. As far as the nonprofit side of things, this is open to private nonprofits, the 501c3s. The loan, like I said, can be used for your working capital needs. That could be payroll, that could be paying your accounts payable, utilities, whatever it is, like I said, that you need to keep that business in business. And this is based on 6 months worth of your working capital needs. So when you go to our website at sba.gov/coronavirus and you click on the Economic Injury Disaster Loan page, it'll have on there, all kinds of information about it, but there should be a spot there that says apply here. You click on that, it'll take you to a streamlined application. Last week we had so many people trying to apply. The system went down several times. So last weekend we vamped the whole system, and while we were at it, beefing it up, putting it on a different cloud or whatever they did in IT to be able to increase the volume for it, we also streamlined the application. So it's a nicer application now, much easier, more fit to the current situation. And when you get to the end of that application, it's going to have a question there that you want to check off about, did you want an advance of up to $10,000? You want to make sure you check that, because that up to $10,000 is a forgivable part. You will not have to pay that back. I know a lot of people call it a grant. We're not really referring to it as a grant because I'm sure, as you know, grants come with lots of strings attached. You got to go back and report that, yeah, you spent the money the way you were supposed to, and all of that. We're not looking for that under this $10,000 especially. And how they figure that amount is basically $1,000 per employee for your organization. Now, the other part we have currently available, like I said, it just started today, is the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP. Now, I will tell you, I just got an email a couple of minutes ago, and as of 1 o'clock today, now mind you, this just started today, but as of 1 o'clock, there were 3,998 applications filed for a total of $1.4 billion. So, yeah, it's something that a lot of people have been waiting for. This one is different from the disaster loan in that this is solely for payroll. The idea behind the PPP is that if you get this loan, and as long as in the 8 weeks after your loan is approved, you use 75% of the loan to cover your payroll costs, and that means making sure whatever your full-time employee level was on, I think it's February 15th, it's the same. You also have not decreased the wages of those full-time employees since February 15th. Then you can request from the lender to have this entire loan forgiven, as long as 75% of the loan was used for the payroll part. And then the other 25% can be used for other things like your utility, your rent, your mortgage, things along those lines. This loan program is up to $10 million. Maturity is only 2 years. The program will end on June 30th or when funds are exhausted. So at the rate it's going right now today, I'm not sure we will make it to June 30th, but we'll see. I'm not sure when it will start exactly for nonprofits. I know independent contractors and self-employed individuals, for whatever reason, the PPP won't start for them until next Friday. And I haven't heard anything about nonprofits, so I would assume that if you want to apply for it, go ahead and start today. Now, this process is a little bit different. The disaster loan program, the EIDL one, you do it online. It's direct from SBA. You cover everything there. This one is different in that you can go to the PPP website, again, through sba.gov/coronavirus, download the application, and fill that out, and then take that to your lender. We recommend you go to the lender that you currently have your accounts at. Don't just pick one, at random, because I've heard already a lot of lenders have said that they are going to serve their current clients first before they go to other clients that aren't currently banking with them. Once you complete that application, take it to your lender. You will need some payroll documentation to prove, that this is the amount, because it is based on your monthly payroll times 2.5. So that way it's covering those 2 months, those 8 weeks after your loan is approved, plus another 25% there to help cover rent, mortgage, utilities, whatever it is that it may be. And like I said, as long as at least 75% of the loan is used for your payroll, you didn't cut out any full-time jobs, you didn't cut the wages any during that 8 weeks afterwards, then you can ask for forgiveness and the entire loan will be forgiven. Basically, SBA will pay the lender back the entire amount. Now, if you do not adhere to those standards, then you will be responsible for whatever portion, didn't fall into those parameters. It is an interest rate of 1%. Again, it's a maturity of 2 years, and the payments are deferred for 6 months. I think that's the most important part. Oh, on the payroll part, payroll is like salary, wages, commissions, tips, employee benefits, vacation, sick leave, insurance, retirement, state and local taxes, and it's capped at $100,000 per employee annually. I talked to a doctor today who said that his annual income is over the 100,000, so he had, is limited to just that 100,000 as far as what he can borrow. So that's kind of the basics of the two programs. Now, I've also heard today someone said that they heard that they couldn't apply for both. Yes, you can apply for both, but you can't kind of double dip because the economic injury disaster loan is also for payroll. So you can't get your payroll for that and then also a payroll under the PPP. That would be double dipping, and unfortunately we just don't have the funds to be that generous right now. So if you haven't, or if you have even applied for the EIDL loan, the disaster loan, that's perfectly fine. That up to $10,000 advance, that's good too. And if you think that you qualify for the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and are interested in that, go ahead and apply for that with your lender. Just be aware that any amount that you get under the EIDL loan will be offset by what you get under the PPP. So if you haven't been approved for your EIDL loan yet and you've gone for the PPP, then basically when you get your EIDL loan, if you go for the full amount, then you would pay back some of that PPP with that EIDL loan that you got. Now that $10,000 up to $10,000 advance will be subtracted from or added to the amount that you get on the payroll Paycheck Protection Program. And I know this is a lot of information and it's very confusing, and I apologize. Honestly, this morning I was furiously reading through the 31 pages of interim rules that were released so that I could bring myself up to speed on everything that's going on right now anyway, so that I could speak to you today. Again, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter if you want more information. If you have a question, you can always reach us at indiana@sba.gov. There's our Twitter account. Also, if you need assistance with anything, our resource partners don't usually work with a lot of nonprofits because their grant from SBA says that they're supposed to work with small businesses, but I know that some of them do help some of the nonprofits, and especially during these highly unusual times. So feel free to reach out to them. Of course, everybody's working remotely, but they're there to help you in whatever way they can. So that's kind of the basics of what we have to offer right now today. That could change tomorrow. You never know, but that's what I have for you right now today. Are there any questions that I could take? Like I said, I know there's a lot of information there and it's kind of confusing. It's confusing for us too, but I'll try and answer any questions you have to the best of my ability.
Rod, thank you. Our first question comes from Teresa Reynolds. And Teresa, feel free to ask your question.
If we applied for these loans last week, should we reapply for them since they've changed?
Yeah, if you applied last week under the old system where you had that big old long crazy application and you had to upload all of your tax returns and everything, please do get back into the system and apply again under the new streamlined application, because you want to make sure, like I said, at the end of that will be that up to $10,000 advance that you can apply for also.
Okay, and also how do we check on our application?
That is a good question. As you can imagine, our disaster center is overrun with work right now. They have recommended that you email disaster customer service at sba.gov. I'm not sure how fast you'll get an answer back, but you can certainly try.
Okay, thank you very much.
And not to worry, if you'd already applied last week and you go in and fill out the new application, that's not going to knock you out of line. The system's smart enough that it'll link the two up and you'll maintain your place in line.
Our next question comes from Natalie Johnson. Natalie?
Yes, thank you for today's information. It's extremely helpful. I just wanted to double check and make sure that for the PPP loan, it is a 1% interest rate. That has changed since, I know there were some documents earlier that said 0.5%. That is in fact 1%?
Correct. It has changed. Like I said, the information the Treasury released yesterday was not final, and so some of it is wrong as what the final rule is, but that is 1%, and that is if you don't meet the requirements to have the loan forgiven.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question comes from Elizabeth Mahoney. Elizabeth? I think you're self-muted, Elizabeth.
Okay, I'm here. I'm here now. Thank you. I'm just curious about the fact that 75% of the loan must be used for payroll for the entire amount to be forgiven. What happens if an employee is to quit, or employees quit and it's out of the employer's control? I'm assuming that there, are caveats for that.
Yeah, you have up to June 30th to replace that person, that employee that quit or left, or if you had to lay off your employees, and once you got the PPP, then you're able to bring them back, and you have, one or two that say, no, I've already got a job elsewhere, I'm good, thanks anyway. Then you just need to replace those positions with someone else. As long as you've got the same number, we're not going to check names and make sure it's the same names you had when you applied as you have, at the end of the 2 months.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Hello.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, so I just had a question about the ability for CDFIs to participate in the program. I saw one piece of guidance today saying that CDFIs were excluded, or let me back up, that if the organization provides loans, then they are excluded. But then I saw something else saying that nonprofit organizations that are lenders are able to participate under the program if they're applying as a 7A eligible organization. Can you speak to that?
Well, last I heard, and it could have changed while we've been on the webinar here, because everything is very fluid right now. But last I heard, yes, any organization that loans money is not eligible for this loan.
Okay, and so that would include nonprofit organizations that lend at below market rates?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, like I said, that could change. I don't have, any talking points. All I have are the interim final rules on the PPP, and like I said, that could change. But as of right now, last I saw, that it was correct.
And then another question, I saw on one documentation that the range of the interest is 0.05 to a max of 4%. Is that still the case or no?
No, it's 1% interest rate fixed for 2 years.
Okay, and that's on the PPP.
Yes, that's on the PPP. On the economic injury disaster loan, it's 2.75% for nonprofits.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Our next question comes from Ken Hudson. Ken, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I've got two questions, if you would, please. Let's see, what if the need lasts beyond 2 months, because the money that is being offered is to cover 2 months? And then my other question is, what about business owners that do not bank with a bank that handles SBA loans? What is their options?
Well, first off, if the need lasts beyond the 2 months, that may be something that comes in, the phase 4, phase 5. I'm not sure. At this time, we haven't heard anything additional. And if we happen to run out of funds before June 30th, which it looks like that could be a possibility as fast as they're going today, I don't know if we will get more funds. That's a possibility too, but I just don't know at this point in time. And then what was your second? Oh, if you bank with someone that's not an SBA lender, actually, we're
Yes.
opening this up to all lenders. We're trying to make it easy for them to join us to become an SBA lender real quick. I don't think the portal is open yet. At least it wasn't before I got on the webinar here. But we will have a portal open for lenders who are interested in becoming an SBA lender so that they can do the PPP. But like I said, I don't believe it's open yet. At least it wasn't at 1 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Natalie Johnson, did you have another question? Okay, a few questions have come in through the questions portal. One is from Sherry Stone, which asks, what documentation is needed for payroll information?
Well, you've got to prove how many full-time employees you have and what their wages are. And so there's a variety of different things that are available that you could use, and it may depend on your lender as to exactly what they will require. But SBA's main thing is that you just prove to us how many employees you had as of February 15th and what their wages were.
And a question from Jerry McCorkle. Are there loans available for nonprofits that are opening specifically to provide assistance during this time, such as pop-up child care centers?
Well, we don't have anything specifically for something like that, like pop-up child centers. I don't know if someone else, another organization, another agency in the federal government will be able to provide something like that. But as far as from SBA, our main things are the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which is, of course, available for small businesses and nonprofits, and then our Paycheck Protection Program, which again is available for small businesses, contractors, and nonprofits.
And Amy Manfold asks, is approval almost guaranteed, or is there a concern that we would apply and not be approved?
Well, there's always a possibility that you would not be approved. Now, I know that we've loosened up our approval requirements quite a bit under the disaster loan program and under what we've given the lenders for the Paycheck Protection Program. But the lender is still going to make sure, especially under the PPP, that you have a need for this. I know that's been a concern, that there will be people that will apply for it because they're looking at it as essentially free money. And unfortunately, that might leave out people that seriously need the money. So it's possible that you would not be approved, but as long as you show the need and such, I don't think that it should be a problem.
And Elizabeth Tollefson asks, once approved after applying, how soon can you expect to receive any funds?
As far as the economic disaster loan, I was told that you should have the money once it's approved. You should have the money within 5 days in your account. It will be direct deposited. And as far as the PPP, that one I'm not sure. It may depend on how quick your lender is to approve it and get the money to you, but it should be fairly quick. It should not be a long drawn out process for either one.
Jacob Simpson asks, can you talk about religious organizations' eligibility for the EIDL and the PPP program? And that also brings up another question. Can you define what a private nonprofit is?
Okay, a private nonprofit, from what I've been told, because before all of this happened, I didn't realize we had private and public nonprofits. But a private nonprofit is like a non-government entity. So as long as you're not like a town or something along those lines, some sort of governmental entity, then you are probably fine. You need to be a 501c3, like I said. And as far as, I'm sorry, what was your other question, your first question?
Can you speak to the religious organization's eligibility for EIDL and PPP?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, normally we can't loan to religious organizations, to businesses that are inherently one type of a religion. But in this instance, if you say you have a church, as long as you have something outside of just the church services, like a daycare in the church, or maybe senior care, a nursing home, something like that, then yeah, we would be able to assist you. Then it's just you need something outside of just that one religious thing. Like I said, if you had like a daycare or something.
And Gerald Parker asked, you discussed full-time employees. How are part-time employees treated?
That I don't know. I haven't seen anything on how those are covered. I would assume if that is part of your payroll expenses, that they could be included, but under the PPP, the part-times I don't think are counted against you as far as what jobs and employees you need to have in place, the number of employees you need to have in place at the time that you ask for the forgiveness. But I could be wrong on that. Like I said, I don't have any talking points. All I'm going by are the interim final rules, and there may be more additional information to come out once they finish those up.
And Don Grossman asked if you could define employee. He says his entity thrives on permanent part-time employees. And how do we calculate payroll eligibility?
Employee is, as far as I know, just a person that works for you, that you pay a salary, a wage, a commission to. And as far as the part-time thing, yeah, that I can't answer because, like I said, I don't have an SOP, a standard operating procedure with all the regulations yet to be able to answer that fully. So that one I can't really give you a good answer on. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
How do you calculate payroll eligibility?
That is based on, what you provide as what your monthly payroll needs are. You certainly have records on how many employees you have, what wages you pay every month. It's based on that. I don't have the list in front of me, I'm sorry, as to exactly what documents the lender may be requesting for you on that.
Sherry Davis has two questions. She asked, what is considered full-time? And then outside of the $10,000 that is forgivable on the EIDL loan is any of the rest forgivable on all of the loans?
As far as what's considered full-time employee, I think that's at least 30 hours a week, but don't quote me for sure on that one. I would have to double check on that one. And as far as anything forgivable under the economic injury disaster loan, only that up to $10,000 advance is forgivable, won't be asked to repay that one. The rest of your economic injury disaster loan, you will need to repay that. But anything under the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, that you can ask for the entire thing to be forgiven.
Great, Rhonda. Thank you. That's all of the questions we have at this particular time. Christine Deutscher. Yes.
This is Jessica. While Rhonda is still there, Rhonda, I have the benefit of not being the speaker and kind of looking at the directive that came out last night. A couple of the questions that came up, and you may have said this, but I just wanted to read, provide what I'm reading, was that employees not only include those who are paid a salary and for whom you pay payroll taxes, but it also mentions 1099 employees. So I just wanted to, quote that. If you're paying off of a 1099, that could be included. And
there's
then,
a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a little bit of confusion on the 1099s, the contractors, as to whether they fall under the PPP, under the payroll, or can they apply separately. And from what I was told this morning, and again, this could change, but this morning the answer was the contractors can apply for both of these loans under their own. So they're not counted as far as under any business or nonprofit organization, because they can file for these things on their own.
Okay, perfect. So they're not falling in underneath another application. They have their own application. Thanks for that clarification.
Mm-hmm.
The other question, there was a question about pop-ups that are arising as a result of the crisis. And what I'm reading is that the applicant must have been in operation on February 15th. I just wanted to have you say that or affirm that. That's what I'm just reading. The applicant was in operation on February 15th, 2020.
Correct. Yes, you must have been, you must have been in operation on February 15th of 2020. Now, we don't care if you were in operation for a year, 100 years, 2 months before that, but as long as you were in operation on that day, then you are covered by these programs.
Thank you.
Christine Deutscher mentions that as a follow-up to this question, that those who are operating these pop-up daycare centers might contact the State of Indiana's Office of Community and Rural Affairs, and they may be able to help. There's no certainty of that, but she just mentioned that.
Great.
I think that's all of the questions we have. Does anyone else have questions for Rhonda? Ken Hudson.
Can you hear me? Thank you. I just want to clarify something before you get off the line.
Sure.
The disaster loan assistance program is forgivable up to $10,000, but that's based on a 10 full-time employee status. Did I hear that correctly?
That up to $10,000 advance on the disaster loan. You don't have to ask for forgiveness on that. We'll never ask for you to pay it back. But now, just to be completely confusing, I guess because we're the federal government and we're not going to make anything too easy, if you apply for the Paycheck Protection Program and get a loan under that, then your $10,000 will be put into your PPP loan, and then that's when you kind of pretty much so have to ask for forgiveness on that. But if you just get the up to $10,000 advance under the disaster loan, then you don't have to ask for forgiveness on that, because as I understand it, we won't ask you to pay it back.
Okay, and then if a case like that happens, then you would have to apply for the disaster loan itself outside of the PPP portion. Let's say, for instance, if the organization needed $45,000 to get through a certain period, that would be applied. That would be applied for as a loan under nonprofit organization guidelines, so on and so forth.
You could apply for the disaster loan. At the end of the application, check the box for the up to $10,000 advance, and then you could apply for the PPP. With the hopes that everything works out and you could have that forgiven, and you wouldn't necessarily have to take the disaster loan once it's offered to you. In fact, you have up to 6 months after your application has been approved to go ahead and accept that loan. So you could hold off on it for a little bit. Now, that's not to say that if you waited, 5 months, that we would still have funds, because we may have run out by then. But then we may not have. We might be okay. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different situations that you could take on that.
Okay, and the disaster loan, does that expire like the PPP program?
Generally, disaster loans, the economic injury disaster loans, expire a year after they are announced. I haven't heard necessarily an expiration date on this one, but I would think January 31st of 2021 definitely will be the expiration date, if not before.
Okay, thank you so much.
A question from Terry Wolf. Terry? Okay, we have a question here from Don Grossman. Are contributions to medical and retirement accounts by our entity included as payroll costs, included in the 75% calculation for forgiveness?
Yes, they are. The only thing probably that's not counted as far as your payroll costs would be any federal employment taxes that you pay.
Terry Wolf, are you on the line? Okay, looks like there are no further questions. So thank you, Rhonda, for assisting us today and joining us on this webinar. And we really appreciate the information that you've shared with us. I know that folks will perhaps find it a little easier now to distinguish between the programs, and hopefully will take advantage of them.
Well, thank you for having me today, and please don't hesitate to reach out to our office if you have any questions.
Thank you, Rhonda. So moving forward, here are some resources for you from the National Council of Nonprofits. They've done an analysis as well as a loan options chart. Now, we'll make a few tweaks to the loan options chart. I asked Rhonda to review that for us, and she graciously did and made a few changes to that. So we will publish those changes as well and put those on our resources hub. Next, we're going to go over the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which is Public Law 116-127. Again, for those of you who would like to read the text, there is the citation. So this deals with paid sick and family leave. And it also provides a refundable payroll tax credit. So you must have fewer than 500 employees. The effective date was Wednesday, the 1st of April, and the expiration date is on the 31st of December. USDOL, the United States Department of Labor, says an organization with fewer than 50 employees may qualify for an exemption from the requirements to provide leave due to school closings or childcare unavailability if the leave requirements would jeopardize the viability of the organization as a going concern. So there is a possibility your organization could receive a waiver from the USDOL from this particular portion of the Act. The Act applies to both full-time and part-time employees, and the Act is retroactive. So in terms of the emergency paid sick leave, it's 2 weeks up to 80 hours of paid sick leave at the employee's regular rate of pay, up to $511 a day, or up to $5,110 over the entire paid sick leave period. Now, in order to qualify, the employee must be quarantined or under an isolation order. They have received advice from a medical doctor to self-quarantine, or they are experiencing symptoms of COVID and are seeking a diagnosis. In terms of the emergency paid sick leave, that's 2 weeks up to 80 hours of paid sick leave at 2/3 the employee's regular rate of pay, up to $200 a day, or up to $2,000 over the entire paid sick leave period. And this is for a bona fide need to care for an individual who is subject to quarantine. The legislation does not define who that individual has to be at this point. So it just does not define whether that's a family member, an elderly neighbor, but it has to be bona fide. And care for a child under 18 years due to school, care or care center closure. Or the child care provider is unavailable. In terms of family and medical leave, up to 10 weeks of family medical leave at 2/3 the employee's regular rate of pay, up to $200 a day. Again, a bona fide need to care for a child under 18 years of age who's either in school or if a care center is closed, or the unavailability due to COVID-19. This does protect an employee's position within the organization. There are exceptions for those organizations with fewer than 25 employees if this particular portion of the act is a hardship on the organization. Again, a waiver would be required from the USDOL. And what if your organization's work site closes? That doesn't have to do with whether your organization has imposed telework policies, but if it closes its doors completely, then the paid leave requirements are canceled. And the employees who are laid off may qualify for unemployment insurance. In terms of refundable payroll tax credits, it's applicable only to the employee's share of payroll taxes. And at the end of each quarter, the least costs exceeding payroll taxes owed will be refunded. And this is the costs that you complete on your IRS Form 941. So some links, here's the links to the U.S. Department of Labor. It has FAQs, it has guidance, it has actual posters that you can now download to place in a place within your organization so that all of your employees can see them, but most of them are working from home, so you could still download that poster and send it to them via email so that they know their rights under the FSCR Act. And then the National Council of Nonprofits also has some analyses that they've done that can provide you with more information. Are there any questions? I'm not sure I'm the right one to answer these. Again, this information was borrowed from the National Council of Nonprofits, so just sharing them at this particular time.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is there a place we can get the slides that you're giving?
Yes, we will have them on our portal, our COVID-19 Resources Hub.
Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa Reynolds. Teresa, I think you're
Yes.
self-muted.
That was me that just asked the question about the slides.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sherry Davis.
Yes, that was my same question, was if the slides are going to be available.
Okay, thank you. Yes, they are. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrew Bradley, who is the Policy Director with Prosperity Indiana, and he's going to share more in regards to other areas that the CARES Act covers under under community economic development. So, Andrew. Andrew, are you there? Okay, so I'll go through these slides here. An overview of the housing provisions here. You'll see the breakdown in terms of how much was allotted in terms of what the Senate proposed and what the House proposed and what the final package ended up for these particular housing programs. Moratoriums on evictions and foreclosures. So the CARES Act instituted a moratorium on foreclosures for all federally backed mortgages, including those covered by HUD, USDA, FHA, the VA, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac for 60 days beginning on March 18th. So a borrower with a federally backed mortgage experiencing financial hardship due to coronavirus may also request a forbearance of up to 180 days. Multifamily housing owners with a federally backed mortgage can request forbearance of up to 30 days, which can be extended by another 60 days. Andrew, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that, and sorry to delay a little bit here in terms of being able to introduce myself and jump in. But let me introduce myself very briefly. My name is Andrew Bradley. As Carrie said, thanks for pinch hitting for me, by the way, Carrie. I'm Policy Director at Prosperity Indiana. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet in person or virtually yet, I've been here for about a month now. Previous to this, for 6 years, I was the Senior Policy Analyst with the Indiana Institute for Working Families, a program at the State Community Action Association, working on policy issues related to Indiana's low and moderate income families. And I'd also worked with the National Skills Coalition in Washington, D.C., where I helped launch and grow a national network of state advocates to promote workforce development and skills policies for low-income adults. So I'm happy to be back home again in Indiana, and what a time to jump right in and start working on these housing and community development issues. Carrie has been talking to you, giving you the overview from the National Low Income Housing Center of the difference between the Senate and the House proposals, and then what ended up in the CARES Act, and then has been talking a little bit about the moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. And let me make sure that I am aligned on the correct slide here. Okay, yes. So again, a distinction, you may have heard a little bit about this moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. There's one at the state level by Governor Holcomb that extends only through April 6th. And we have put out a call just today over our email and on our blog, calling on him to extend that state level moratorium. What we're talking about, what you have in front of you here on the slide, is the moratorium for federally backed mortgages and rentals. And so what you see here is that this applies to foreclosures covered by HUD, the Department of Agriculture, FHA, Department of Veterans Affairs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac for 60 days, going back to March 18th. You can see that those borrowers with those federally backed mortgages who are experiencing financial hardship due to coronavirus can also request a forbearance for up to 180 days, which can be extended for another 180 days at the request of the borrower. Multifamily housing owners with a federally backed mortgage can request a forbearance for up to 30 days, which can be extended by up to another 60 days at the request of the borrower on the condition they agree to not evict tenants or charge tenants late fees. So that is federally backed mortgages. Then if we move on to the next slide, we will find out about the moratorium on evictions. So this is for the federal government instituted a moratorium on filings for evictions for renters in homes also covered by a federally backed mortgage, and that goes for 120 days from the date of enactment, which is when President Trump signed the CARES Act on April 27th. So that would go to July 25th, so 120 days. That temporary moratorium is for most residents of federal subsidized apartments, including those, again, by HUD, Agriculture, Treasury, and the bill also institutes a moratorium on filings for evictions for renters in homes covered by federally backed mortgages for 120 days. And you can see here, we will, as Carrie said, we'll post these slides on our COVID portal. And you can see the analysis here from the National Low Income Housing Center, and there's additional guidance that I think is actually very helpful from the National Housing Law Project. So that covers the moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. Next, what I would like us to do, go ahead to the next slide, is to talk about some of the housing and community development features that are in the CARES Act itself. And so I wanted to start out talking about the Emergency Solutions Grant. And Diane Yentl, the head of the National Low Income Housing Center, said that this stimulus bill is definitely an important first step. It's overdue and not enough to meet all the needs, but there are some really substantial funding mechanisms in this new law. The biggest and most relevant funding for the homeless in the CARES Act is the $4 billion in what's known as the Emergency Solutions Grant. That's a lot of money that can be used by shelter providers and outreach workers to acquire basic safety measures, to obtain more space so that people can isolate or quarantine, to contract with hotels to use vacant hotel rooms to put people in, to provide rental assistance to get people into apartments, and more. And so let's take a look at what's in those Emergency Solutions Grant. You can see here there's $4 billion to help prevent an outbreak among sheltered and unsheltered people who are experiencing homelessness, and also very low-income households, which are defined at earning less than 50% of the area median income, who are at risk of homelessness. These funds can also be used for eviction prevention assistance, including rapid rehousing, housing counseling, and rental deposit assistance to mitigate the adverse impacts of the pandemic. So of this total amount that's provided, $4 billion, up to $2 billion can be distributed according to allocations already made in the fiscal year 2020 within 30 days of enactment. The remaining amount will be distributed within 90 days to communities with the greatest needs based on criteria determined by the HUD secretary, such as risk of transmission, rates and number of unsheltered and sheltered homeless populations, and economic and housing market conditions. So the bill dispenses with any existing match requirements. We can go on to the next slide. So a little bit more about the Emergency Solutions Grant. These funds can be used for temporary emergency shelters, waiving federal habitability and environmental review standards. The funds can also be used to cover staff costs, training, and hazard pay. As we will discover in a lot of the housing stipulations or the funds throughout the CARES grant, the HUD Secretary has broad authority to waive or set alternative requirements for any statute or regulation outside of those that are related to fair housing, non-discrimination, labor standards, and the environment, if the Secretary finds good cause for the waiver and if the waiver is necessary to prevent and respond to the coronavirus. In addition to using these funds to address coronavirus, the bill will allow these emergency solutions grants, funds allocated in previous fiscal years, to be used for this purpose. So again, those funds from previous years can be used for the same purposes as the ESGs. However, it's important to note that none of the funds provided in the ESG may be used to require people experiencing homelessness to receive treatment or perform any other prerequisite activities as a condition for receiving shelter, housing, or other services. And a little later on, we'll have a chance to see some of the initial breakdowns of funding for these emergency solutions grants for Indiana. Okay, we can go on to the next slide, please. So next up, let's start to take a look at another really important tool that's in the CARES Act, the Community Development Block Grants, additional funding for coronavirus response in the CARES Act. So Congress provided $5 billion for CDBG to cities and states in the CARES Act. $2 billion of that will be allocated to states and units of local government that received an allocation under fiscal year 20 formula. So $2 billion will follow the existing formula. Another $1 billion will go directly to states and areas based on public health needs, the risk of transmission, the number of coronavirus cases, and economic and housing market disruptions. And so I think we're still waiting to see exactly what that breakdown will be, but that's another $1 billion. Now then the remaining $2 billion of that 5 will be allocated to states and units of local government based on the prevalence and risk of COVID-19 and related economic and housing disruptions resulting from coronavirus. Okay, so we will break down a little bit more of what's in, you can go ahead to the next slide. We'll get a look later on in this presentation of what some of those numbers will look like for Indiana by municipality and non-allocated area. All right, so this community development block grants in the CARES Act, the bill provides broad authority, again, to the HUD Secretary to waive or set alternative requirements for any statute or regulation, again, outside of those related to fair housing, non-discrimination, labor standards, and the environment, if necessary, to expedite the use of these funds and to prevent and respond to coronavirus. So again, those are kind of the guardrails in terms of what the HUD Secretary's discretion is for setting some of these funds. The broad authority could allow jurisdictions to use CDBG funds to provide emergency rental assistance or address the needs of people experiencing homelessness, for example. And this is a key point, and this is something that advocates are starting to learn more about, this authority to provide emergency rental assistance. And again, I want to point folks, when we're done here, go back and check your email if you're on Prosperity Indiana's email list. If you're not, please go ahead and sign up. And then go to our policy blog, and you will see that we have used this authority for some of our recommendations to the governor to use the authority to provide emergency rental assistance to Hoosiers who are hardest hit throughout this COVID pandemic. So we're starting to see the pieces come together in terms of what was appropriated by this CARES Act and how that could apply to federal and state responses. All right, let's go on to the next slide, please. So a little bit more about the community development block grants in the CARES Act. The bill eliminates the cap on the amount of funds a grantee can spend on public services. It removes the requirement to hold in-person public hearings and in order to comply with national and local social gathering requirements. And it allows grantees to be reimbursed for COVID-19 response activities, regardless of the date that the costs were incurred. This funding builds on the $6.7 billion provided in fiscal year 2019 and 2020 by allowing grantees to combine prior year funds with new funding in order to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. In addition, additional $150 billion in flexible funds was provided to state and local governments through the Coronavirus Relief Fund for more of the same purposes as CDBG. And we will have a state level amount for that later in this presentation as well. Okay, on to the next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the tenant-based rental assistance that's specifically provided in the CARES Act. The CARES Act provides $1.25 billion for tenant-based rental assistance to help public housing agencies maintain normal operations and take other necessary actions to respond to coronavirus. Of this amount, $850 million can be used for a combination of administrative costs and other expenses for activities, including those to support and maintain the health and safety of assisted households, and to retain and support participating landlords. The remaining $400 million is to adjust renewal funding for public housing agencies that experience a significant increase in voucher per unit costs and would otherwise need to terminate rental assistance for families due to the lack of funds. So that's what's available for public housing agencies. These funds will be distributed based on need as determined by the HUD secretary. And again, here is, it's the same bullet points for what the HUD secretary has available to him in terms of restrictions and authorities here. So the secretary may award unobligated funds for prior fiscal years for incremental TBRA as well. So that is tenant-based rental assistance. Yes, again, so those are the same items. I think we can move on to the next slide, please. All right, project-based rental assistance. The CARES Act provides $1 billion for project-based rental assistance to maintain normal operations and to take any other necessary actions during the period that the program is impacted by coronavirus. And again, the rest here is the standard, the guardrails there on what the HUD secretary may or may not use for his discretion on these funds. Okay, so that is a overview of some of the funding here. Let's see. In terms of public housing, the bill provides $685 million for the Public Housing Operations Fund to maintain normal operations and to take any other necessary actions. The bill allows through the end of the 2020 calendar year for public housing agencies to combine its capital and operating funds, and including some funds from past fiscal years to respond to the coronavirus. It allows the HUD secretary to extend this flexibility in additional 12-month increments if needed, and it provides broad authority to the secretary to waive and set the authorities according to the same guidelines that we've already talked about. So we can move on to the next slide. Yes, thank you. For other housing and HUD programs, in the CARES Act, $65 million is provided for housing for persons with AIDS or HOPWA to address operations, rental assistance, and other actions to prepare for and respond to coronavirus for this population. The Act provides $50 million for Section 202, housing for the elderly, including $10 million for service coordinators and $15 million for Section 811, housing for persons with disabilities. A total of $2.5 million is provided for fair housing activities, including $1.5 million for the Fair Housing Assistance Program Partnership for Special Enforcement Grants, and $1 million for the Fair Housing Initiative Program. It should be noted, though, that no funds were provided to address the needs in the Department of Agriculture's rural housing portfolio. So no funds for rural housing in this act. All right, so then we can move on to the next slide. I think this one gets to Some state level data that you may find very interesting. We did not include here, there's a link that we can provide later. This comes directly from a spreadsheet provided by HUD. So let me give you just a minute to take a look here. This is Indiana formula allocations that are in the CARES Act for some of the programs that we've already talked about. And that includes a total of $40.3 million for CBDG money, $20.1 million in the emergency solutions grants that we talked about, and then $464,000 for HOPWA. And again, that's the Housing Opportunities for Person with AIDS. And you can see here, this is broken down by municipal area, and then also at the bottom for Indiana non-entitlement area. So these are the funds that will be broken down by those municipal areas for these three large buckets of money. And again, this slide with a link to the original source will be available on our portal after this discussion. Okay, we can go on and move on to the next slide. So unemployment insurance. So we're now shifting a little bit away from talking strictly about housing programs, and you may have heard these provisions discussed elsewhere, but we wanted to make sure that you understood them in terms of the larger picture of the CARES Act, and we thought it was worth including here. So the unemployment insurance provisions of the CARES Act, it creates a pandemic unemployment assistance program that provides federally funded unemployment benefits to many, though not all, workers who lose their jobs but are ineligible for the state's regular UI program. This includes workers lacking an extensive enough work history or looking for part-time work, as well as those who have exhausted their regular UI benefits. Workers can receive up to 39 weeks of this pandemic unemployment assistance benefits. The program is in effect through December 31st. This program provides $600 per week. Federally funded benefit increases through July 31st for recipients of the pandemic unemployment assistance or regular UI. This sizable increase will help workers and their families stay afloat and boost overall consumer demand to mitigate the downward economic trends. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Some more about unemployment insurance in the CARES Act. The Act extends the maximum number of weeks of regular UI benefits. For those eligible for regular UI, the bill will allow states to provide an additional 13 weeks of federally funded extended benefits. Workers who exhaust those benefits can receive the pandemic unemployment assistance we just talked about, but only as long as that program is in place. The bill provides funding to states that have approved short-term compensation, known as work-sharing programs, in which employers reduce certain employees' hours in lieu of layoffs, and the affected workers provide partial unemployment benefits. Indiana does not currently have a work-sharing program. It's been advocated for at the state level, but not implemented to date. I know that some of Prosperity Indiana's partners in the Indiana Coalition for Human Services have advocated for the state to now adopt a work-sharing program as soon as possible, and the CARES Act provides funding to help states like Indiana establish such programs. Okay, on to the next slide. So in terms of FEMA disaster relief, there are some impacts that apply to housing and community development as well we wanted you to be aware of. The CARES Act provides $45 billion for the Disaster Relief Fund, which is the primary funding source for FEMA disaster recovery programs, including direct federal assistance to states, municipalities, and tribes, as well as public assistance, individual assistance, the Disaster Unemployment Program, and more. An additional $200 million is provided to the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, which provides shelter, food, and supportive services through local service organizations. President Trump's National Emergency Declaration under the Stafford Act permits both the federal assistance and public assistance grants for emergency protective measures. Under governor requested major disaster declarations, which currently exist in several states, FEMA can also provide the full suite of programming to assist in pandemic response. And so this is something that may be available if Indiana takes this step as well. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So the Coronavirus Relief Fund, we mentioned this earlier, alluded to this. Congress provided $150 billion Corona Relief Fund for state, tribal, and local governments to help broadly cover any necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency created by COVID-19. The bill specifies that within 30 days of passage, the funds will be released to states based on their relative populations, receiving at least $1.25 billion. These state funds can also be separated out to provide funding directly to local governments. The funding cannot be used to replace already allocated state funds. And as we mentioned before, some of the purposes that this Coronavirus Relief Fund, it can provide similar services to what the CDBG will be able to offer. So because of the broad nature of these funds, state and local governments can use these dollars to help address the needs of people experiencing homelessness and low-income renters impacted by the pandemic. Of the total amount provided, $3 billion will be provided to territorial governments in DC, while $8 billion is reserved for tribal governments. And on the next slide is the dollar amount that Indiana is estimated to receive. So the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities estimates that Indiana will receive $2.61 billion in its share of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And you can see here, this is in comparison to our neighboring states. This is based on population and need. So you can see where Indiana fits in compared to Illinois, Kentucky, Michigan, and Ohio. Okay, and then also we wanted to mention SNAP. SNAP is something that comes up and it affects community development and housing providers. We wanted to let you know though that the CARES Act fails to increase SNAP benefits, which are one of the most effective stimulus policies in the Great Recession. SNAP benefits are extremely modest. They're averaging only $1.40 per person per meal. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act that Carrie talked about extensively earlier gives states important flexibility to extend SNAP benefits, but these expansions are only available during the public health emergency itself and not after. However, many CARES Act provisions assume that the economic fallout will outlast the public health emergency. So assistance for families facing food insecurity need to be expanded during the course of the downturn. So that is something that we're going to need to look to in future phases of the coronavirus response. So in addition to that, I know we've talked a lot about housing and community development resources, and you've seen there have been links all along the way to additional information. We also wanted to provide some additional resources that you could look to. So these will be available with this package as well. And this includes a comprehensive list of community and economic development funding line items throughout the CARES Act, and a summary of the COVID Phase 3 unemployment insurance and tax provisions, as well as small business provisions in the CARES Act that come from the bill itself. So with that, that is a lot of information there for you. And Carrie, I cannot see here what the questions are, but do we have any questions at this point?
We do not at this time. Check.
I have one.
Tim Hudson, okay.
Yes, thank you. That was a lot of information. So my biggest resource would be accessing this information once we're done here. And I need to know, do I need to have some type of membership through Prosperity Indiana or some other group in order to access this information?
Thank you for the question, and I didn't catch whose question that was. My understanding is that we are going to post the slides for this on our COVID response page, and that is something that is available specifically for members of Prosperity Indiana. However, a lot of the information that I just gave you was provided as well through the National Low Income Housing Center. I know it's available on their COVID response page, a lot of the breakdown in terms of the individual allocation program by program, borrowed extensively from the National Low Income Housing Center. So it's available through there. If there's anything that you need specifically help with, let me give folks my email address while I have you here, and that is abradley, ABRADLEY, at prosperityindiana.org. And so I'm happy to help to be a guide through any of the information that we just discussed and talked with you.
This is Jessica. Can I provide some other clarification? We do have Fifth Third supporting these webinars now, and so I think that we can send this out to our webinar participants as well, since there's a broader thing at play beyond our membership from Fifth Third's perspective.
Thank you.
We do have one question from Terry Saltzman. Are there any programs for new college graduates who will be unable to get jobs due to the coronavirus? The only thing I'm aware of under the CARES Act is that there are some provisions for student loans and a period of where they waive the period for payback of student loans. But we can get some more information for you on that, Terry. Any further questions for Andrew? All right. We do have a COVID-19 response email, and you can find that here at covid19response@prosperityindiana.org. So if you have any further questions, please email those, or if you have other suggestions, ideas, comments regarding COVID-19, please email them to us, and we'll respond accordingly. So that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes today's webinar. We want to thank you for participating, and we want to thank you for all the great questions that you had. And we hope to see you on Monday. We have a webinar from 10 a.m. to 11 on how to manage nonprofit organizations during times of crises. And so please join us for that. You can go to our webpage at prosperityindiana.org, where it will take you to a link to register for that particular webinar. And we also have some other upcoming webinars throughout the month of April, which you may want to participate in. So everyone, please have a safe and good weekend. And again, thank you for participating. That concludes today's call.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.